About 4.6 billion years ago, in an ordinary corner of the Milky Way, a vast swirl of gas and dust began to spin with a slowness that, measured on human timescales, might be mistaken for stillness. This was the solar nebula, an interstellar cloud enriched by previous generations of stars that had died explosively, seeding space with heavy elements such as iron, silicon, carbon, and oxygen. That stellar heritage, suspended in an almost absolute vacuum, contained the ingredients necessary for the formation of an entire system. The process did not begin violently, but with a subtle change in stability. A shockwave, perhaps the nearby explosion of a supernova, disturbed the balance and forced the cloud to begin its slow gravitational collapse. That initial gesture would be the remote origin of the planet that would one day host oceans, mountains, forests, and conscious beings. As the nebula contracted, gravity concentrated most of its mass at the center. That point, increasingly dense and hot, would give rise to the future sun. At the same time, the remaining material began to shape into a flattened protoplanetary disk, similar to a ring of bright dust spinning around the nascent star. Within this disk, tiny particles collided again and again, some fragmented, others stuck together forming larger aggregates, and others were ejected by turbulence. This chaotic dance, repeated over millions of years, began the process of accretion, by which microscopic grains transformed into increasingly larger bodies, first pebble-sized rocks, then blocks several meters across, until the first planetesimals finally appeared. Planetesimals were solid fragments capable of attracting material through their own gravity. In the inner region of the disk, composed mainly of rocky minerals and metals, these bodies began to collide and merge, giving rise to planetary embryos. One of them, situated at an optimal distance from the nascent sun, accumulated enough mass to become a protoplanet. Its surface was a magma ocean, an infernal world constantly bombarded by meteorites and traversed by convective currents that mixed its internal components. This forming body is what we now call Earth. During the first few 100 million years, the young planet was unrecognizable. There were no continents, no seas, and no stable atmosphere. The surface was an incandescent ocean with temperatures that could exceed 1,000 degrees, and the sky was filled with toxic gases escaping from its interior: water vapor, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, ammonia, methane, and sulfides. Each impact of an asteroid or comet released energy equivalent to thousands of nuclear bombs, reshaping the topography, vaporizing minerals, and generating new plumes of gas that thickened the primitive atmosphere. Earth was not yet a home. It was a laboratory of geological processes that defined its future identity. One of the most decisive events of this stage was the impact that gave rise to the Moon. According to the most widely accepted hypothesis, about 4.5 billion years ago, a Mars-sized body known as Theia collided with the young Earth in an oblique and devastating impact. The energy released completely melted the planet's outer layers, ejected enormous amounts of material into space, and created a ring of debris that, within decades or centuries, fused to form our satellite. The newborn Moon orbited at a much closer distance than it does today. Its presence stabilized Earth's rotational axis and regulated the tides, factors that would have a profound impact on the future emergence of life. Without that impact, the planet's history would have followed a completely different path. Over time, Earth began to cool. Although the surface was still dominated by magma, the outer layers started to solidify, forming the first crust. It was a fragile crust, continuously fractured by internal heat and impacts, but it represented the beginning of geology as we know it. In parallel, the gases escaping from the planet's interior accumulated to form a dense, opaque atmosphere, composed mostly of carbon dioxide and water vapor. The temperature was so high that the vapor could not condense, but as the planet lost heat, the cycle slowly began to change. Cooling allowed water vapor for the first time to condense into rain, not a passing drizzle, but an unrelenting deluge that may have lasted thousands or even millions of years. Drops fell onto burning surfaces, instantly evaporating into columns of steam, but the persistence of the phenomenon eventually cooled the planet enough to allow liquid water to begin collecting in depressions and basins. This is how the first oceans formed, primitive bodies that would cover much of the surface and pave the way for the chemistry that would give rise to life. Meanwhile, fundamental processes continued in the planet's interior. The differentiation of materials, that is, the separation between core, mantle, and crust, was in full progress. The heaviest elements, such as iron and nickel, migrated toward the center to form a metallic core that would generate Earth's magnetic field. This field, essential for future life, protected the atmosphere from solar winds and prevented the planet from being exposed to cosmic radiation. The combination of an active core, a stabilizing moon, and the continuous presence of liquid water placed Earth in an exceptional position within the solar system. The early atmosphere, still dense and lacking free oxygen, exerted a considerable greenhouse effect. Carbon dioxide trapped solar heat and prevented the oceans from freezing, keeping the planet in a state suitable for complex chemical reactions. The minerals present in the water, such as silicates, carbonates, sulfides, and dissolved metals, provided a nutrient-rich environment that would facilitate the formation of organic molecules. This point is crucial. Although primitive Earth was extremely hostile to modern living beings, it contained the fundamental ingredients for life to emerge at some point in the near future. The oceans, in their youth, were dense, warm, and tinged with chemical compounds. In their depths, near hydrothermal vents capable of expelling mineral-rich water at extreme temperatures, increasingly complex molecules began to assemble. The energy from the magma, combined with the presence of catalytic minerals and a dynamic chemical environment, created conditions that would allow the formation of self-sustaining structures, the precursors of the first cells. Although that achievement belongs to the next chapter, its seed was planted in this initial stage. From the surface, Earth would have appeared as a strange landscape: turbulent oceans, active volcanoes spewing lava and ash, an opaque atmosphere filtering sunlight in reddish tones, and a gigantic moon dominating the night sky. It was a convulsive world, but not chaotic. Each process had a precise role in the evolution of the planet. Tectonic plates, still in their initial configuration, began to move slowly, anticipating the formation of protocontinents. Internal heat fueled constant eruptions, enriching the seafloor with essential minerals. Everything was leading toward the creation of a stage where life could emerge for the first time in the cosmic history of our world. Earth left behind its infernal childhood when stabilized oceans, a balanced atmosphere, and orderly internal geology created a planet surprisingly prepared for an unprecedented event: the emergence of life. The Precambrian and the emergence of life. The Precambrian spans almost 90% of Earth's entire history, a temporal expanse so vast that it defies human imagination. During this period, which extends from the formation of the planet 4.6 billion years ago to about 541 million years ago, Earth transformed its surface, atmosphere, and internal chemistry to become a world capable of supporting complex life forms. What we know today as continents, seas, and biological cycles were barely hinted at in a world profoundly different from the present one. However, it was here in these first eons, called the Hadean, Archean, and Proterozoic, that the most momentous event in all of natural history occurred: the origin of life. About 4 billion years ago, Earth was still marked by a constant bombardment of asteroids. Many of these impacts released devastating energy, capable of vaporizing entire oceans within hours. This period, known as the Late Heavy Bombardment, seemed incompatible with any lasting form of life. Each advance was erased by a new collision, and yet, as the intensity of impacts decreased and temperatures stabilized, the planet began to offer environments conducive to the emergence of prebiotic chemistry. The abundant presence of liquid water, reactive minerals, and energy sources such as sunlight, electrical discharges, and volcanic activity created a fertile primordial soup for the formation of complex organic molecules. In the depths of the oceans, near hydrothermal vents and volcanic seeps, ideal conditions existed for the synthesis of life's precursor molecules. These structures expelled superheated water loaded with minerals such as iron, nickel, and sulfur, which acted as natural catalysts. Over millions of years, organic molecules began to organize into more stable patterns capable of storing and transferring chemical information. It is in this environment that many scientists place the origin of the first protosystems, aggregates of lipids and self-replicating molecules that, although not yet cells, represented a decisive step toward biology. The transition from chemistry to biology was gradual and likely occurred in multiple locations simultaneously. From these natural experiments arose the first known primitive cells, called protocells. These units, composed of simple lipid membranes, could enclose their own rudimentary genetic material and metabolize substances from their surroundings. Although extremely fragile, these protocells had a crucial quality: they could replicate with errors and variations. These errors were not failures but evolutionary opportunities. With each imperfect duplication, new possibilities arose. This was the birth of molecular competition that would shape all subsequent evolutionary history. By around 3.8 billion years ago, functional unicellular organisms already existed, the first bacteria. They were tiny, invisible to the human eye, and extraordinarily resilient. Their ability to survive in extreme environments, with acidic waters, high temperatures, and a total absence of oxygen, marked the beginning of life on Earth. The atmosphere at that time was very different from today's. It contained no free oxygen and was composed mostly of carbon dioxide, methane, and ammonia. However, these conditions were sufficient to sustain vast populations of anaerobic microorganisms. Over time, some of these bacteria developed a revolutionary mechanism, primitive photosynthesis. This was not modern oxygen-based photosynthesis, but an ancestral form that used compounds such as hydrogen sulfide to obtain energy. Yet the real transformation came with the appearance of the first organisms capable of oxygenic photosynthesis, possibly cyanobacteria, around 2.7 billion years ago. These microscopic creatures completely transformed the planet's chemistry. They used sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into energy, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. It was a silent process, but its impact was colossal. Oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere and oceans, triggering one of the most important events in Earth's history: the Great Oxidation Event, which occurred around 2.4 billion years ago. The increasing presence of oxygen was lethal for many anaerobic species, causing mass extinctions invisible to our eyes. At the same time, however, it opened entirely new evolutionary pathways. Oxygen enabled more efficient forms of metabolism and generated the ozone layer, which protected the planet's surface from ultraviolet radiation. Without this transition, complex life would never have had the chance to develop. During the Proterozoic, the oceans were filled with peculiar structures known as stromatolites, mounds formed by layers of bacteria and sediments. These living fossils, which still exist in a few places around the world, testify to the prolonged dominance of photosynthetic bacteria. But the true evolutionary leap of the Precambrian was not the diversification of bacteria, but the appearance of the first eukaryotic cells, an event that occurred around 1.8 billion years ago. Unlike bacteria, these cells possessed a defined nucleus, internal organelles, and a much more advanced genetic machinery. According to the endosymbiotic theory, their origin resulted from the fusion of several independent microorganisms. The symbiosis between an ancestral cell and a bacterium that became the mitochondrion marked the birth of biological complexity. With the establishment of eukaryotes, life began exploring new forms and strategies. Around 1.2 billion years ago, the first multicellular organisms emerged, beings that combined specialized cells to perform distinct functions within a single body. This advancement allowed organisms to grow larger, more efficient, and more complex. They were no longer simple isolated cells, but coordinated communities. Thus appeared the first red, green, and brown algae, which added variety to marine ecosystems. Although these early multicellular organisms were far from modern animals, they represented a fundamental innovation: cellular cooperation that would eventually allow the emergence of increasingly sophisticated creatures. The Precambrian was also the stage for profound geological transformations. Continents, which began as fragmented protocontinents, repeatedly collided and separated, forming supercontinents such as Vaalbara, and Rodinia. These mergers and breakups reorganized seas, atmospheres, and climates, directly affecting the evolution of living beings. Global glaciations, known as Snowball Earth, covered almost the entire planet with ice between 720 and 635 million years ago. These extreme ice ages exerted enormous evolutionary pressure, eliminating many organisms but allowing those capable of adapting to hostile conditions to survive. After each glaciation, life re-emerged with renewed diversity. By the end of the Precambrian, approximately 600 million years ago, the Ediacaran biota appeared, a collection of soft-bodied organisms representing the first known macroscopic animals. These creatures, with enigmatic and hard-to-classify shapes, inhabited calm seafloors. Some were disc-shaped, others resembled feathers, ribbons, or segmented structures. They resemble nothing alive today, yet they are evidence that complex, multicellular life was already consolidating. Their presence heralded the imminent biological revolution that would irreversibly transform Earth. Moving toward the end of the Precambrian, the last millions of years were filled with signs that life was ready for an unprecedented leap: the development of skeletons, advanced mobility, and active predation. The Cambrian explosion. About 541 million years ago, Earth was on the verge of a transformation that would forever alter the course of life. For billions of years, the oceans had been mostly populated by tiny, simple, soft-bodied organisms: bacteria, algae, primitive sponges, and barely distinguishable creatures. But at the onset of the Cambrian period, something extraordinary happened. In a span that geologically was like a blink of an eye, an unprecedented explosion of biological diversity occurred. This evolutionary acceleration, known as the Cambrian explosion, gave rise to nearly all the major animal groups that exist today. Life went from being a microscopic shadow to displaying a parade of complex creatures with jointed bodies, internal organs, nervous systems, and defensive structures. The exact causes of this phenomenon are still debated, but scientists agree that it resulted from a combination of factors converging in a unique way. One factor was the increase of oxygen in the oceans. During the Proterozoic, photosynthesis performed by cyanobacteria and algae had released oxygen for millions of years, reaching levels sufficient to support larger, metabolically demanding organisms. Another key factor was the development of regulatory genes capable of controlling body formation, including Hox genes, which allow organisms to define structures such as the head, tail, or body segments. This genetic innovation opened evolutionary doors that had previously been closed. The climate release after the snowball Earth glaciations also played a decisive role. After millions of years of global ice, Earth entered a warming phase that transformed the oceans into more stable and nutrient-rich environments. Reorganized ocean currents transported essential minerals, promoting the proliferation of algae and increasing biological productivity. With more food available, trophic chains began to develop complexity. For the first time, large-scale predator-prey interactions emerged, driving an evolutionary arms race that stimulated the appearance of shells, spines, complex eyes, and advanced locomotion systems. Among the most emblematic Cambrian protagonists were the trilobites. These early arthropods, equipped with a hard, segmented exoskeleton, compound eyes, and jointed legs, dominated the seas for nearly 300 million years. Their diversity was astonishing. Some measured just a few millimeters, while others reached lengths of over 70 centimeters. Trilobites were among the first animals to develop advanced senses and more complex behaviors, such as the ability to roll up for protection against predators. Their fossil record is so abundant that they have become one of the most recognizable symbols of this era. Another notable group was the archaeocyaths, vase-shaped marine organisms that inhabited the planet's first reefs. Alongside them appeared more sophisticated sponges, segmented worm-like animals, and the first mollusks with mineralized shells. Biomineralization, the ability to produce hard structures such as shells, plates, or spines, was one of the most decisive innovations of the Cambrian. It allowed organisms to protect themselves, control their buoyancy, and explore new ecological niches. This capability radically transformed marine ecosystems, but if one creature symbolizes the experimental spirit of the Cambrian, it is Anomalocaris. This giant predator, which could reach a meter in length, had claw-like frontal appendages, a circular mouth with sharp plates, and an undulating body capable of rapid movement. It was one of the first superpredators in history. Its large compound eyes with thousands of individual lenses gave it extraordinary vision. For the soft-bodied, defenseless fauna of the time, Anomalocaris was a constant threat. Its existence demonstrates that predation was already an important evolutionary driver, pressuring other organisms to develop armor, spines, or camouflage strategies. Nearby lived equally remarkable creatures, such as Hallucigenia, a small tubular animal with sharp dorsal spines and soft tentacles underneath. For decades, paleontologists misinterpreted its orientation, representing it upside down or even inverted. Its twisted anatomy and strange appearance have made Hallucigenia one of the most iconic Cambrian fossils. Also emerging was Opabenia, an animal with 5 eyes and a flexible front appendage shaped like a proboscis, capable of capturing prey in the sediment. This level of anatomical experimentation was a clear sign that evolution was exploring every possibility. Another important actor was Wiwaxia, an organism covered with scales and spines whose evolutionary origin remains under study. Its oval body and defensive armament reflect the pressure exerted by emerging predators. In the seafloor, Lobopodians, ancestors of modern onychophorans, thrived, as well as segmented worms with more organized bodies allowing precise movement. Around them, tiny creatures swam among clouds of plankton, while elusive predators prowled among colonies of filter-feeding organisms. Cambrian fauna, far from being isolated creatures, represented the first complex ecological structure in history. There were burrowing animals that disturbed the sediments, filter feeders that cleaned the water, swimmers that traversed the water column, and predators dominating the food chain. Ecosystems diversified into all kinds of niches: shallow platforms, muddy bottoms, emergent reefs, and deeper zones bathed by cold currents. Life began weaving intricate networks of ecological relationships. The Cambrian fossil record also includes traces, burrows, and marks that reveal complex behaviors, animals digging tunnels, leaving drag marks, or modifying their environment as they moved. These traces, known as ichnofossils, are as important as body remains because they indicate that animal activity intensified. For the first time, life directly influenced geology, aerating sediments, redistributing nutrients, and modifying the physical structure of the seafloor. Over the following millions of years, this wave of diversity did not stop. Although many of the strangest creatures disappeared, the main lineages persisted. From arthropods would descend insects, crustaceans, and arachnids. From primitive chordates, organisms with a flexible structure called a notochord, would descend fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The Cambrian was the starting point of the great evolutionary narrative that would define future eras. Early Paleozoic. After the Cambrian explosion, the planet's oceans became scenes of unprecedented biological diversity. It was the beginning of the early Paleozoic, a stage encompassing the late Cambrian, Ordovician, and Silurian periods, where life consolidated its fundamental structures and began experimenting with new forms, sizes, and behaviors. Earth was still a world dominated by the sea, but ecosystems became more complex with each passing million years. Evolution no longer proceeded blindly. It had acquired rhythm, competition, and ecological purpose. At the start of the Ordovician, about 485 million years ago, much of Earth was covered by warm, shallow seas. Currents efficiently distributed nutrients, and oxygen levels remained high enough to allow the proliferation of metabolically demanding organisms. Most continental masses were grouped into several smaller plates, moving slowly, forming tropical archipelagos and extensive continental shelves. These environments provided the ideal stage for the emergence of more elaborate life forms. Animals that had appeared in the Cambrian began to diversify spectacularly. Trilobites remained abundant and varied, but other groups began to occupy increasingly important roles. Among them were brachiopods, hard-shelled organisms anchored to the substrate that filtered particles from the water. Their enormous success allowed them to dominate large expanses of the seafloor. Around them flourished bryozoans, colonial animals capable of constructing complex structures that offered shelter to small creatures. These organisms were the silent architects of Paleozoic ecosystems. New predators also emerged during this period, transforming ecological relationships. Nautiloids, ancestors of modern nautiluses, developed conical shells and jet-powered mobility, giving them a significant advantage over slow prey and soft-bodied organisms. Some reached lengths of over 2 meters, becoming the lords of the Ordovician seas. Their very presence triggered a new evolutionary arms race. Animals with thicker shells, defensive spines, evasive movements, and burrowing strategies appeared in response to these super predators. Meanwhile, reefs began to expand thanks to the increase of sponges, calcareous algae, and primitive coral-like organisms. Although they were not modern corals, these structures provided ecological stability, creating oases where biodiversity multiplied. Among the crevices and protrusions of these reefs flourished creatures such as the first complex echinoderms, relatives of starfish and sea urchins, with extravagant shapes and articulated arms that allowed them to filter food. One of the most significant evolutionary advances of the early Paleozoic was the emergence of conodonts, small serpentine-bodied animals with mouth structures made of phosphatic dental elements. These elements, which fossilize easily, became essential tools for modern geologists due to their usefulness in dating sedimentary rocks. Conodonts were neither large nor dominant, but they represented a crucial innovation. The first complex internal skeletons, distant precursors to the development of vertebrae and jaws. However, the true stars of the early Paleozoic were the fish. The first vertebrates with rudimentary backbones had appeared in the late Cambrian, but during the Ordovician and Silurian they began to diversify. Agnathons, jawless fish, dominated these waters. Their bodies were covered with bony plates in some cases, providing protection from predators. Their simple circular mouths allowed them to feed by filtering particles or sucking sediments, inaugurating new feeding strategies that promoted ecological diversification. During the Silurian, from about 443 to 419 million years ago, the oceans witnessed one of the most groundbreaking innovations in evolution: the jaw. Jawed fish, such as placoderms and acanthodians, opened up an entirely new range of possibilities. For the first time, vertebrate animals could bite, crush, tear, and actively capture prey. This development triggered fierce competition between predators and prey, accelerating evolution even further. Placoderms, with their impressive bony plates covering much of their bodies, were among the most formidable vertebrates of the early Paleozoic. At the same time, ecosystems began to show greater vertical complexity. Some zones of the seas received sufficient light, while deeper regions remained in darkness, generating environmental layers with distinct communities adapted to each level. Filter-feeding organisms dominated the illuminated areas. Predators lurked in intermediate zones. Blind and specialized creatures inhabited the dark regions. Life was learning to occupy every available corner of the planet. Although the early Paleozoic remained a fundamentally marine world, small changes began to hint at the future conquest of land. In coastal areas, intertidal pools formed where algae and microbes lived exposed to recurrent cycles of wetting and drying. Some green algae developed primitive respiratory structures that allowed them to survive out of water for brief periods. These organisms would become the ancestors of the first terrestrial plants. As the Silurian progressed, atmospheric oxygen content slowly increased, and the thin, poor coastal soils began to be colonized by mosses and simple plants without deep roots. Although still tiny, these plants initiated a profound ecological shift. For the first time, complex organisms physically modified the terrestrial landscape, retaining moisture, stabilizing sediments, and creating microhabitats for other beings. This nascent process in the Silurian would prepare the land for the arrival of animal organisms in subsequent periods. The Silurian also witnessed the diversification of marine arthropods, including eurypterids, the so-called sea scorpions, which could reach astonishing sizes. These predators occupied the top of the food chain in several coastal regions and represented an early version of arthropod supremacy that would dominate much of the Paleozoic. Some species even began to explore environments near the shore, supporting their bodies on sturdy legs that, while adapted to water, hinted at a future terrestrial transition. The early Paleozoic seas were vibrant, colorful, and dynamic. There were white sands covered with trilobites, expanding reefs, powerful jawed predators, armored fish, and creatures of forms unknown to the modern world. Every biological interaction, anatomical innovation, and local extinction contributed to the development of more robust ecosystems. Late Paleozoic. By the time of the Devonian, about 419 million years ago, Earth was moving toward a transformation that would forever change the relationship between life and the planet, the definitive colonization of land. Until then, the oceans had been the absolute center of evolution, but during the late Paleozoic, biological innovations allowed plants, fungi, insects, and the first vertebrates to venture beyond the coasts. The world was preparing for a scale shift from marine-confined ecosystems to green continents and imposing forests. During the early Devonian, the climate was warm and stable. The seas continued to be dominated by extraordinarily diverse fish, but the decisive revolution was happening along riverbanks and swampy areas. The first land plants, such as mosses, liverworts, and small vascular plants like Cooksonia, had survived in moist environments during the Silurian, but were now beginning to diversify. The key was the emergence of vascular tissues, which allowed water and nutrients to be transported throughout the body. This advance freed plants from absolute dependence on surface water, enabling them to reach modest heights and expand into drier regions. Evolution continued producing innovations. The first true roots appeared, anchoring plants to the soil and allowing them to access buried nutrients. The presence of stable soils, enriched by organic decomposition, facilitated colonization of new areas. Plants began to expand in green mosaics covering wide coastal expanses. Their growth not only altered landscapes but also transformed the atmosphere, increasing oxygen levels and reducing carbon dioxide. This change caused a gradual decrease in the greenhouse effect, slightly cooling the planet. By the Middle Devonian, the first primitive forests appeared. Trees such as Archaeopteris, which could exceed 20 meters in height, dominated entire landscapes. These giants combined characteristics of ferns and early gymnosperms. Their ability to form robust trunks with true wood marked a decisive moment in the planet's ecological history. For the first time, Earth had forests that cast shade, accumulated layers of leaf litter, and offered three-dimensional habitats. The carbon cycle was transformed and atmospheric oxygen began to rise to unprecedented levels, creating favorable conditions for the expansion of terrestrial life. The success of plants did not go unnoticed by other organisms. Arthropods, which had already explored land to a limited extent in the Silurian, found immense opportunities in these environments. The first winged insects appeared, including ancient relatives of dragonflies, which would soon dominate the Paleozoic skies. Before them, myriapods, scorpions, and primitive arachnids emerged, some reaching impressive sizes thanks to high oxygen levels. Arthropleura, for example, was a giant myriapod over 2 meters long that roamed Devonian forests feeding on plant material. These creatures introduced a new type of predation and competition, expanding terrestrial ecological complexity. Meanwhile, in the oceans, fish continued to diversify. The Devonian is known as the Age of Fishes due to the emergence of key groups: bony fish, cartilaginous fish, and lobe-finned fish. The latter, sarcopterygians, developed muscular fins supported by internal bones, which would become the anatomical basis for the limbs of the first tetrapods. In coastal waters and swamps, some fish began to strengthen these fins to maneuver among roots and plants, propelling themselves briefly out of the water. Their bodies were adapted to low-oxygen environments, developing rudimentary lungs capable of absorbing air directly. Among them emerged transitional forms such as Eusthenopteron, Panderichthys, and Tiktaalik, creatures combining aquatic features with clearly terrestrial elements. The transition culminated with the appearance of the first tetrapods about 370 million years ago. Acanthostiga and Ichthyostiga are early examples of these animals, already possessing limbs with digits, mobile necks, and functional lungs. Although still largely dependent on water, their anatomy marked the beginning of a new era. Vertebrates were starting to conquer land. This event opened an evolutionary range of opportunities that would forever transform continental ecosystems. However, not all changes in the late Paleozoic were expansive. Toward the end of the Devonian, a series of extinction events profoundly altered marine life. While terrestrial forests thrived, the oceans experienced oxygen depletion, global cooling, and changes in sea levels. Several families of fish, trilobites, and reef organisms disappeared. The Devonian closed with ecological instability, but what came next would be even more dramatic. At the beginning of the Carboniferous, the planet transformed once again. The high oxygen concentration allowed the development of giant insects such as Meganeura, a colossal dragonfly with a wingspan exceeding 70 centimeters. Meanwhile, amphibians diversified and ventured into new swampy regions. The Carboniferous forests, dense and humid, formed extensive jungles of tree ferns, giant lycophytes and horsetails. The undergrowth teemed with arthropods, while large amphibians hunted prey in murky waters. Limited decomposition in these environments led to vast peat deposits, which over time would become coal. In this setting, a major evolutionary innovation emerged: the amniotic egg. Early reptiles, carrying this protective structure that enclosed the embryo in a self-contained aquatic microenvironment, broke free from dependence on ponds and swamps. This allowed them to colonize drier regions and venture far from traditional amphibian habitats. Animals like Hylonomus represent these first reptiles, small, agile, and capable of living entirely on land. Meanwhile, the planet's geography continued to shift. During the Carboniferous and early Permian, continents gradually began to merge, moving toward the formation of a single supercontinent, Pangaea. This supercontinent altered global climate patterns, creating arid regions in its interior and humid zones along its margins. Terrestrial and marine life reorganized in response to these new conditions, generating unique ecosystems that thrived until the arrival of an unprecedented crisis: the Mesozoic, the age of reptiles. The Triassic began about 252 million years ago with a silent, impoverished planet marked by the Permian biological collapse. Life had been reduced to a few resilient lineages, now facing an empty world full of opportunities. The continents remained united in a single supercontinent, Pangaea, stretching from pole to equator, surrounded by a vast global ocean called Panthalassa. Within it, extensive regions were arid and extreme, with high daytime temperatures and cold nights. This harsh environment favored the emergence of the first reptiles truly adapted to terrestrial life. Among the survivors entering the early Triassic were small synapsids, some amphibians, and above all a group of diapsid reptiles that would soon begin an unprecedented diversification, the archosaurs. This lineage, with lightweight skulls and efficient anatomical structures, evolved rapidly and explored multiple niches. Among them emerged the first primitive crocodiles, early pterosaurs, and the direct ancestors of dinosaurs. They were small animals compared to the giants that would come later, but they already possessed key features such as more upright limbs, relatively high metabolisms, and a remarkable ability to withstand dry climates. About 230 million years ago, in the Middle and Late Triassic, the first true dinosaurs appeared. Among them were small bipedal carnivores such as Eoraptor and Herrerasaurus, originating from the highlands of present-day northwestern Argentina. These agile, fast animals with keen senses represented a decisive evolutionary innovation: lightweight bodies, flexible spines, and hind limbs adapted for sustained locomotion. Alongside them, early herbivores like Plateosaurus, a prosauropod that reached respectable sizes during a period when gigantism was just beginning to emerge, evolved. This balance changed abruptly at the end of the Triassic, about 201 million years ago, with another mass extinction linked to the initial fracture of Pangaea and volcanism associated with the Central Atlantic. Many dinosaur competitors disappeared, allowing dinosaurs to occupy the large available ecological niches. The Jurassic began with a different landscape. Pangaea slowly fragmented, generating inland seas, more humid climates, and a variety of ecosystems that fueled the expansion of dinosaurs in all directions. During the early Jurassic, sauropods evolved toward colossal sizes. Creatures like Vulcanodon and Shunosaurus initiated a trend that would later produce giants such as Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus. Their elongated necks allowed them to feed on vegetation at different heights, and their enormous bodies, supported by robust bone columns, were adapted for traveling long distances in search of food. Meanwhile, theropods, the carnivorous lineage, began dominating the food chain. Megalosaurus, Allosaurus, and other early predators developed advanced hunting strategies with powerful jaws, sharp claws, and keen senses. The Jurassic landscape also saw the thriving of pterosaurs, the first vertebrates capable of flight. Dimorphodon, Rhamphorhynchus, and later Pterodactylus soared through warm skies propelled by wing membranes supported by an exceptionally long fourth finger. Some relied on coastal fish, while others hunted insects or scavenged. Their presence initiated an aerial competition that would last millions of years and eventually lead to the evolution of the first birds. The progressive fragmentation of Pangaea continued reshaping the global panorama. The separation of Laurasia and Gondwana created larger seas, more varied regional climates, and natural barriers that stimulated evolutionary divergence. In some areas, conifer forests emerged, while in others, giant ferns and cycads dominated. Ecosystems became more complex and fauna responded with increasingly specialized innovations. The Cretaceous, beginning about 145 million years ago, took this diversification to its peak. Large sauropods persisted in several regions but now shared territory with a wide range of advanced herbivores. Among them were ornithopods like Iguanodon, equipped with grasping hands and powerful beaks. Early ceratopsians, whose descendants would develop spectacular horns and frills, and early hadrosaurs, which later dominated vast plains with complex dental batteries adapted for grinding tough plants. Carnivores also evolved into more specialized forms. Spinosaurus, the largest known theropod, developed a semi-aquatic body and a dorsal sail whose function remains debated. Carcharodontosaurus and Giganotosaurus, giant predators of the southern hemisphere, rivaled the largest theropods of Laurasia in size. In North America, Tyrannosaurus rex emerged toward the end of the Cretaceous as a predator with a crushing skull and extraordinarily powerful bite. Its senses, especially smell and binocular vision, were among the most advanced of any terrestrial animal of its time. Meanwhile, early birds continued refining their anatomy. Direct descendants of small Maniraptoran theropods, these creatures developed more complex feathers, hollow bones, and superior flight control. Archaeopteryx, which appeared in the late Jurassic, had paved the way, but in the Cretaceous more aerially adapted lineages emerged, capable of longer flights and quick maneuvers to escape predators or hunt insects. The Cretaceous also saw the emergence and expansion of a group of plants that would forever transform terrestrial ecology, angiosperms or flowering plants. These plants developed efficient reproductive strategies, attracting insects and enabling directed pollination. Their appearance triggered an evolutionary cascade that promoted the diversification of insects, birds, and small mammals. The Earth became greener, more colorful, and more diverse. The Jurassic and Cretaceous. The Jurassic began about 201 million years ago after the Triassic extinction that eliminated numerous competitors and allowed dinosaurs to expand with unprecedented evolutionary freedom. Earth was entering an era characterized by warm climates, inland seas, and vast plains covered by conifers, tree ferns, and cycads. The constant fragmentation of Pangaea generated archipelagos, peninsulas, and new coastlines that altered winds, rainfall, and currents. In this scenario, Jurassic ecosystems diversified rapidly. Herbivorous dinosaurs were the first to occupy the new environments. Sauropods, descendants of Triassic lineages, reached gigantic dimensions. Brachiosaurus, with its neck raised toward the sky, fed on the tallest treetops, while Diplodocus traversed the undergrowth with a horizontal neck. Their skeletons, light yet strong, adapted to support over 30 tons of weight. Constant growth and relatively active metabolism allowed them to thrive in regions where vegetation was abundant for much of the year. Stegosaurs also appeared during this time, characterized by large bony plates along their backs. Stegosaurus stenops, one of the most famous, displayed a double row of plates likely used for thermoregulation or as visual signals to intimidate rivals. Its tail ended in powerful spikes capable of inflicting serious injuries on predators. These herbivores coexisted with other groups such as primitive ornithopods, which soon developed faster locomotion and increasingly complex jaws. At the top of the Jurassic food chain were large theropods. Allosaurus fragilis dominated North America, while related theropods played a similar role in Gondwana. These predators combined sharp vision, reinforced jaws, and long hind limbs, enabling quick ambushes. Their curved, serrated teeth were optimized for tearing flesh and causing rapid bleeding. The presence of giant prey forced theropods to develop strength, precise balance, and in some cases, cooperative hunting strategies. As the Jurassic progressed, the skies filled with equally remarkable creatures. Pterosaurs evolved into more agile and aerodynamic forms. Pterodactylus, with its long neck and elongated skull, hunted fish in shallow coastal waters. Others, like Rhamphorhynchus, had long stabilizing tails and fed on insects or flying fish. Aerial diversity increased alongside the diversification of coastal habitats, cliffs, and fertile deltas. During this period, one of paleontology's most emblematic fossils appeared, Archaeopteryx lithographica. Found in the German Sollenhofen deposits, this late Jurassic animal combined dinosaur traits, teeth, claws, and a long bony tail, with well-developed feathers. Its anatomy revealed that birds were not simply separate creatures, but the direct result of the evolution of small theropod dinosaurs. With Archaeopteryx, a lineage emerged that would later dominate the skies after the extinction of pterosaurs. The Jurassic closed with lush ecosystems and growing biodiversity, yet tectonic changes continued. Laurasia slowly separated from Gondwana, expanding seas and opening new migration routes. Ocean currents modified by this continental rifting created wetter climates in some regions and drier ones in others. This geological dynamism set the stage for the Cretaceous, an era where diversity would reach its peak before an abrupt collapse. The Cretaceous began about 145 million years ago, with high seas, warm climates, and continents still in motion. The continued fragmentation of Pangaea multiplied habitats, creating unique ecosystems in each region. Forests became more complex and dense, and the first flowering plants, or angiosperms, appeared. These plants introduced new reproductive strategies based on directed pollination and protected seeds, radically transforming interactions with insects, reptiles, and mammals. Herbivorous dinosaurs continued to adapt. Iguanodonts, such as Iguanodon bernisartensis, developed a spike-shaped thumb and powerful dental batteries for crushing tough vegetation. Later, hadrosaurs refined this strategy to the maximum. With broad beaks and enormous rows of replaceable teeth, they could process large amounts of fibrous plants. Some had bony crests that resonated when producing sounds, indicating complex social behavior. In parallel, ceratopsians evolved into spectacular forms. Protoceratops, of medium size, displayed a cranial frill that would later become the distinctive feature of large herbivores like Triceratops. These structures, besides protecting the neck, served as display elements in mating rituals or intimidation. Ankylosaurs, for their part, developed extreme armor and club-like tails capable of breaking bones. Among predators, the most impressive theropods in history emerged. Spinosaurus aegyptiacus, with its semi-aquatic body and a dorsal sail of debated function, hunted giant fish in African deltas. Giganotosaurus carolini from Patagonia rivaled Tyrannosaurus rex in size, though with a different biomechanical approach favoring speed. In North America, T-Rex dominated the Maastrichtian plains with an unprecedented bite among terrestrial animals. Its thick, rounded teeth crushed bone to access nutritious marrow. The Cretaceous also saw the diversification of small feathered dinosaurs. Lineages like dromaeosaurids, including Velociraptor and Deinonychus, developed relative intelligence, sharp vision, and retractable sickle-shaped claws. Although small compared to the giant herbivores, these predators had a significant impact on local food chains. As the continents continued to separate, oceans teemed with marine reptiles such as mosasaurs. Tylosaurus and Mosasaurus ruled warm seas with streamlined bodies and powerful jaws. Primitive sea turtles and plesiosaurs continued to occupy older niches, though increasingly pressured by the new predators. About 66 million years ago, at the end of the Cretaceous, the solar system intervened again in the history of life. An asteroid approximately 10 kilometers in diameter struck what is now Chicxulub, Yucatan. The energy-released vaporized rock caused tsunamis across continents and expelled immense amounts of dust and sulfur into the sky, blocking sunlight. The world plunged into a global winter that halted photosynthesis and collapsed food chains. Non-avian dinosaurs disappeared along with pterosaurs, ammonites, and countless terrestrial and marine species. Organisms that survived, small mammals, birds, and resilient reptiles, would inherit a vacant planet with a long recovery process ahead. The Cenozoic, the age of mammals. The Chicxulub impact marked the end of the Mesozoic and the beginning of the Cenozoic about 66 million years ago. As the dust clouds finally began to clear, Earth was unrecognizable. Entire forests had burned, vast regions were covered in ash, and marine ecosystems had almost completely collapsed. The large reptiles that had dominated for over 160 million years were gone. Only birds, direct descendants of certain theropods, managed to survive. In this devastated landscape, small mammals, previously relegated to secondary niches, emerged as the new protagonists of evolution. The first millions of years of the Paleogene were dominated by simple forms: insectivorous mammals, primitive rodents, early marsupials, and shrew-like animals that sheltered in burrows during the K/PG boundary crisis. Their small size, generalist diets, and rapid reproductive capacity allowed them to occupy spaces left vacant by dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and marine reptiles. The climate, still unstable, oscillated between cold phases and brief warming periods, but the absence of large predators and herbivores opened evolutionary niches that mammals would explore with unprecedented speed. During the Paleocene, between 66 and 56 million years ago, new lineages emerged on almost every continent. Among them were the first primitive ungulates, ancestors of horses, tapirs, deer, and bovines, with small bodies and limbs adapted for running on soft soils. Early primates also diversified, beginning to exploit branches in the recovering forests. Among the greenery, initial carnivorous mammals developed teeth specialized for slicing meat, paving the way for larger predators in later periods. Earth experienced an extraordinary climatic event about 56 million years ago, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. During this event, global temperatures rose abruptly due to massive carbon release, likely caused by volcanism, global wildfires, or methane hydrate destabilization. Poles became temperate, oceans warmed, and tropical forests expanded to latitudes that today would be incompatible with such vegetation. In this warm, humid world, mammals diversified even further. The first tiny horses like Eohippus, primitive cetaceans, and bats capable of agile flight in the dense forest canopy appeared. During the Eocene, between 56 and 34 million years ago, the climate began to slowly cool. In the seas, true giants emerged. Cetaceans evolved from terrestrial animals into fully aquatic forms. Basilosaurus, over 15 meters long, dominated the warm waters, while smaller relatives developed echolocation techniques still characteristic of modern odontocetes like dolphins and sperm whales. On land, the first large herbivores appeared, such as brontotheres and early titanotheres, as well as large predators belonging to the creodonts. The terrestrial landscape, however, was about to change dramatically. The collision between India and Asia, which began around 50 million years ago, started raising the Himalayas, altering global wind and precipitation patterns. These changes contributed to the planet's gradual cooling and the formation of permanent polar ice. Antarctica became isolated from other landmasses, and the Antarctic circumpolar current emerged, cooling the oceans and further reducing global temperatures. In this new climate, during the Oligocene, dense forests retreated and were replaced by open grasslands. This shift led to a profound transformation in herbivorous mammals. Many developed longer limbs for running in open spaces, taller teeth for grinding abrasive grasses, and sharper senses to detect distant predators. Ancestors of horses, camels, and antelopes quickly adapted to the emerging savannas. Predators also evolved in response to these faster prey. The first modern carnivores appeared, including creodonts and later true placental carnivores, giving rise to lineages that would become felids, canids, mustelids, and hyenas. The evolutionary race between fast herbivores and increasingly agile predators accelerated, marking one of the most significant dynamics of the Cenozoic. During the Miocene, between 23 and 5 million years ago, mammalian diversity reached extraordinary levels. Earth, cooler and drier than in previous epochs, experienced a massive expansion of grasslands. In Africa, the first modern hominids appeared, relatives of apes and humans, while in Eurasia and North America, giant mammals evolved, such as Paraceratherium, enormous hornless rhinoceroses that could exceed 5 meters at the shoulder. In the oceans, cetaceans split into specialized lineages. Filter-feeding whales developed baleen to capture krill and plankton, inaugurating an efficient feeding mode that would lead to extreme gigantism in later times. Meanwhile, continental movements continued altering climates and landscapes. The formation of the Isthmus of Panama, about 3 million years ago, connected North and South America, allowing a massive faunal exchange known as the Great American Biotic Interchange. Armadillos, sloths, and other southern marsupials migrated north, while saber-toothed cats, camelids, and northern canids invaded South America, generating ecological pressures that dramatically altered ecosystems. The Quaternary glaciation, which began 2.6 million years ago, transformed the world again. Large areas of the northern hemisphere were covered by ice sheets that advanced and retreated with climatic cycles. This period saw the emergence of iconic megafauna: woolly mammoths, mastodons, giant bison, woolly rhinoceroses, cave bears, and predators like Smilodon, the famous saber-toothed cat. In more temperate regions, wild horses, camels, deer, and bovids expanded widely. Amid these changes, a lineage of African primates experienced a remarkable increase in cognitive capacity, tool use, and social complexity. The emergence of the genus Homo around 2.5 million years ago coincided with climatic oscillations that favored adaptive flexibility. Over time, these hominids would dominate terrestrial ecosystems and modify the planet in unprecedented ways. The formation of the modern continents. The current shape of the world, with defined oceans, high mountain ranges, and separated continents, is the result of a process that began hundreds of millions of years ago and continues today. The history of Earth, from the fragmentation of Pangaea to the present continental arrangement, is a narrative of tectonic plates colliding, separating, sinking, and rising, modifying climates, ecosystems, and the evolutionary trajectory of countless species. At the beginning of the Mesozoic, Pangaea was still a massive landmass surrounded by the Panthalassa Ocean. However, internal stresses, accumulated from mantle heat, began fracturing the supercontinent around 200 million years ago. The process was not instantaneous. Fissures, volcanism, and the formation of oceanic ridges slowly announced the opening of new seas. The first division separated the north, later called Laurasia, from the south, or Gondwana, creating inland seas that would profoundly alter the global climate. As Laurasia and Gondwana continued to separate, the Atlantic Ocean began to form. Its early stages were narrow basins that slowly widened, pushed by the mid-Atlantic ridge. This process, known as seafloor spreading, created new oceanic crust and gradually displaced continents toward their current configurations. Europe and North America gradually separated, while Africa and South America began to drift apart, leaving a gear-like coastline still perceptible in their outlines. During the Cretaceous, the fragmentation of Gondwana accelerated. Africa moved northward, eventually colliding with the Eurasian plate millions of years later. South America drifted westward, finally separating from Africa about 100 million years ago. Australia began to separate from Antarctica, while India, previously connected to Eastern Africa and Madagascar, embarked on an extraordinary journey northward at an unusually rapid geological pace. India, acting as a solitary continental island, advanced toward Asia at more than 15 centimeters per year. Its collision with the Eurasian continent, which occurred about 50 million years ago, triggered one of the most significant geological events of the Cenozoic, the uplift of the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau. This collision profoundly altered global atmospheric circulation. The Asian monsoons intensified, humidity patterns shifted, and climatic regimes essential for entire ecosystems emerged directly as a consequence of the continental collision. Meanwhile, Antarctica moved toward the South Pole. Its progressive isolation allowed the formation of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, which circulates around the continent without interruption and maintains extremely low temperatures. The accumulation of Antarctic ice began about 34 million years ago, permanently transforming the global climate, cooling the oceans, and reducing atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. In the Northern Hemisphere, North America experienced complex tectonic processes. The subduction of the Farallon Plate beneath its western margin generated mountains, volcanism, and the formation of coastal arcs. The Rocky Mountains, a mountainous spine stretching from Canada to Mexico, emerged largely due to these interactions. The uplift of these mountains altered river courses, created sedimentary basins, and generated isolated ecosystems that influenced the evolution of megafauna and, later, the first humans inhabiting this continent. In South America, the subduction of the Nazca Plate gave rise to one of the planet's most spectacular geological formations, the Andes Mountains. Extending over 7,000 kilometers, the Andes formed around 40 million years ago and continue to rise today. Their presence created regions of extreme aridity, such as the Atacama Desert, cloud forests on eastern slopes, habitable highlands, and a remarkable variety of climates that laid the foundations for an impressive diversity of plant and animal species. The movement of continents also had profound impacts on the oceans. The gradual closure of the Tethys Sea, due to the advance of Africa and Eurasia, altered ocean circulation and contributed to planetary cooling during the Neogene. Later, about 3 million years ago, the formation of the Isthmus of Panama connected North and South America and permanently separated the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This event caused drastic changes in ocean currents, strengthened the Gulf Stream, and increased moisture transport northward, possibly intensifying quaternary glaciations. In Africa, tectonic activity created the Great Rift Valley, an active continental fracture that extends from the Red Sea to Mozambique. This region formed deep lakes, active volcanoes, and elevated plateaus. The rift played a crucial role in human evolution, as its diverse environments, including savannas, mountains, forests, and lakes, favored the diversification of early hominids. Climatic changes driven by tectonic fluctuations forced these ancestors to adapt to increasingly complex and variable environments. The present-day shape of the continents is, in a sense, a snapshot. The plates are still moving. Africa continues to drift north, narrowing the Mediterranean. Australia moves steadily northward. The Pacific Plate is being subducted under Asia and the Americas, and the Mid-Atlantic Ridge continues pushing Europe and America in opposite directions. The Earth is still forming, and millions of years from now its geography will be different. The emergence of primates. Primates emerged in a world very different from today, a planet covered by dense tropical forests, warm climates, and ecosystems in full expansion after the extinction of the dinosaurs. Their story began about 65 million years ago in the early Paleocene, when mammals began occupying ecological niches left vacant after the Mesozoic collapse. In this context, small arboreal mammals began developing traits that would, over time, define the entire order primates: forward-facing eyes, grasping hands, the ability to leap between branches, and a relatively larger brain. The first recognizable primates belonged to a group known as the Plesiadapiforms. They were tiny, squirrel-like animals that lived in trees and fed mainly on insects and soft fruits. Their hands and feet already showed a tendency toward flexibility, but lacked the more specialized adaptations of their descendants. By the end of the Paleocene and the beginning of the Eocene, the planet's forests expanded notably due to the warm and humid climate dominating much of the globe. This explosion of vegetation provided abundant and varied resources, driving the evolution of more specialized forms. During the Eocene, between 56 and 34 million years ago, primates reached a decisive stage of diversification. In Africa, Asia, and North America, the euprimates, or true primates, appeared. Among their most important traits were forward-facing eyes, which improved depth perception, shorter snouts, enhancing visual efficiency, and long, flexible fingers with nails instead of claws. This combination of visual, tactile, and locomotor abilities allowed them to navigate precisely among branches in dense forests, where survival depended on speed and coordination. Euprimates split into two major lineages, Adapiforms and Oomyforms. The Adapiforms, similar to modern lemurs, had more robust bodies and led relatively calm, arboreal lives, feeding on leaves and fruits. Oomyforms, on the other hand, were smaller, more agile, and probably nocturnal, with large eyes adapted to darkness. Both lineages represent evolutionary experiments exploring different strategies for life in the Eocene forests. During this period, the first ancestors of modern tarsiers, and indirectly the monkeys, also appeared. Asia played a central role as an evolutionary crucible, with fossils like Archicebus achilles, a tiny primate about 55 million years old, already showing mixed traits: long fingers, an ankle adapted for leaping, and large eyes suited to nocturnal life. These creatures reveal how primates began specializing in increasingly defined ecological niches. The Eocene was not only a time of expansion, but also of transition. Toward its end, global climate began to cool due to changes in ocean currents and continental configurations. tropical forests retreated in many regions, replaced by drier and more open environments. This shift caused the gradual disappearance of several primitive groups and pressured survivors to adapt to a wider variety of habitats. With the onset of the Oligocene, about 34 million years ago, Africa emerged as the primary stage for the evolution of anthropoid primates, the precursors of monkeys, apes, and humans. During this period, forms like Egyptopithecus appeared, a medium-sized primate with a somewhat larger brain, robust dentition, and the ability to move both among branches and along thicker limbs. Its forward-facing eyes, powerful jaws, and more advanced postcranial morphology indicate a significant evolutionary leap. The relative isolation of Africa, separated by seas from other land masses, allowed these primates to evolve without direct competition from other lineages. Over millions of years, anthropoids expanded their diversity. Some adapted to frugivorous diets, others developed teeth specialized for processing leaves and hard seeds. The African jungles became an evolutionary laboratory where primates experimented with new locomotor forms, precise leaping, improved grasping, and more upright body postures. By about 25 million years ago, in the early Miocene, the first true apes appeared. Among them, Proconsul is one of the most emblematic genera. Although it lacked a tail, a distinctive feature of modern apes, it still retained limbs adapted for walking along branches rather than hanging. Nevertheless, its anatomy shows clear evolutionary trends: greater mobility in the shoulders and hips, a more rigid trunk, and an increasing reliance on vision over smell. Apes were beginning to develop a more varied locomotor repertoire that would eventually include brachiation, occasional bipedal movement, and advanced manipulation. The Middle and Late Miocene was a golden era for apes. Numerous lineages thrived in Africa, Europe, and Asia, exploring a remarkable diversity of sizes and lifestyles. Small, canopy-dwelling apes appeared, medium-sized apes that combined walking and climbing, and even giant apes like Gigantopithecus, which could reach over 2 meters in height. Among these lineages, one particularly important group arose in eastern Africa, the hominoids that would eventually include gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. The tectonic and climatic changes of the late Miocene profoundly affected primate evolution. The uplift of the Great Rift Valley in Africa created mountains, valleys, and basins that fractured habitats and forced entire populations to adapt or disappear. Regions that had once been continuous forests became mosaics of scattered woodlands, savannas, open plains, and shrublands. This environmental heterogeneity pressured some apes toward new survival strategies. Among the lineages that thrived under these pressures were the first hominids. These African apes began developing adaptations related to incipient bipedalism, increased manual dexterity for manipulating objects, and a more diverse diet that included fruits, tough leaves, roots, and even small animals. Their evolution marked the beginning of a transformation that would reshape the biosphere in a relatively short time. The evolution of hominids. The history of hominids, the lineage leading from early bipedal apes to the genus Homo, is one of the most complex and fragmented narratives in paleontology. It begins about 7 million years ago in Africa, during a period of significant global climate change. The expansion of savannas and fragmentation of forests forced several primate lineages to adapt to new ecological challenges. It was in this changing context that the first indications of bipedalism appeared, one of the most decisive anatomical innovations in human evolution. The oldest known candidate at the base of the hominid lineage is Sahelanthropus chadensis, discovered in Chad and dated to about 7 million years ago. Its skull combines ape-like traits with surprisingly modern features, such as a more forward-positioned foramen magnum, the opening through which the spinal cord passes. This arrangement suggests a more upright posture than that of contemporary primates. Although postcranial remains are inconclusive, evidence indicates that Sahelanthropus may have been a partial biped, alternating between ground and arboreal locomotion. Following Sahelanthropus were other possible early hominids, such as Orrorin tuganensis in Kenya, about 6 million years old, and Ardipithecus cadaba in Ethiopia, about 6 million years old, dating between 5.8 and 5.2 million years ago. These fossils show partial adaptations to bipedalism, particularly in the femur and pelvis. However, they remained adapted to arboreal life as well, with curved hands for climbing and long fingers for grasping branches. These early hominids lived in mixed environments such as open forests, wooded savannas and wetlands, suggesting that bipedalism did not arise in open plains but in complex habitats where walking on two legs provided advantages for moving between dispersed food sources. About 4.4 million years ago, Ardipithecus ramidus appeared, one of the best-known hominids thanks to the partial skeleton nicknamed Ardi. This primate combined remarkable anatomical traits, a pelvis partially adapted to bipedal locomotion, grasping feet with a divergent big toe and a relatively small body size. It was not an efficient terrestrial walker, but it was a hominid in full transition. Its diet, based on fruits, leaves and tubers, reflects the diverse food resources of early Pliocene African forests. The next major evolutionary step came with the Australopithecines, a group of hominids that thrived between 4 and 2 million years ago. Australopithecus anamensis, dating to about 4 million years ago, was one of the earliest in the lineage, showing more pronounced bipedalism and dentition adapted to a varied diet. However, it was Australopithecus afarensis, known thanks to the famous skeleton Lucy, that consolidated this mode of locomotion. Living between 3.9 and 3 million years ago, afarensis had long legs, a wide pelvis, and non-grasping feet, characteristics of a competent biped. Nevertheless, it still retained long arms and joints suited for climbing, indicating a mixed lifestyle between trees and ground. Australopithecines inhabited environments that alternated between open savannas, riverbanks, and intermittent forests. Their diet included fruits, seeds, leaves, roots, and occasionally small animals. Changing conditions favored the evolution of strong jaws and highly durable teeth. Some species, such as the paranthropines, including Paranthropus boisei and Paranthropus robustus, developed massive skulls, powerful sagittal crests, and enormous molars adapted for processing tough vegetation. They were specialists in fibrous foods, unlike the more gracile Australopithecines, which maintained a more flexible diet. The evolution of hominids took a decisive turn around 2.5 million years ago with the appearance of the first representative of the genus Homo habilis. This hominid, with a larger cranial capacity than Australopithecines, between 600 and 700 cubic centimeters, showed significant improvements in hand-eye coordination and manipulation skills. It is associated with the earliest tools of the Oldowan complex, rudimentary artifacts made by striking stones to produce cutting edges. These tools allowed access to bone marrow, skinning of prey, and processing of hard tubers, increasing the nutritional value of their diet. Shortly after, around 1.9 million years ago, an even more consequential species appeared, Homo erectus. This hominid reached cranial capacities of 800 to 900 cubic centimeters, developed a more streamlined body and body proportions close to those of modern humans. Its long limbs and narrow rib cage indicate an adaptation for prolonged movement in open savannas. Homo erectus is also the first known hominid to control fire, possibly as early as 1 million years ago, a skill that transformed diet, allowed cooking of food, warded off predators, and facilitated life in colder climates. Mastery of fire, combined with increasingly sophisticated tools of the Herculean complex, allowed Homo erectus to expand beyond Africa. It was the first hominid to disperse widely across Eurasia, reaching places as distant as China, Indonesia, and the Middle East. This expansion marks the beginning of a true primitive human diaspora, where different populations adapted to local climates, ecosystems, and challenges over hundreds of thousands of years. Meanwhile, in Africa, more advanced lineages of the genus Homo emerged. Homo heidelbergensis, around 700,000 years ago, had a larger brain, more complex tools, and greater social capacity. From this lineage descended the Neanderthals in Eurasia and anatomically modern humans in Africa. Homo sapiens and the mastery of fire. The emergence of Homo sapiens is one of the most decisive events in the history of life. It arose in Africa around 300,000 years ago in a world inhabited by multiple human species, Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in parts of Asia, late Homo erectus in Indonesia, and archaic groups scattered across Africa. In this diverse scenario, Homo sapiens emerged as a species with cognitive, linguistic, and symbolic capacities that would transform the planet faster than any geological phenomenon. The oldest fossils attributable to our species come from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco and show features that already anticipate the modern shape of the skull, a higher forehead, reduced brow ridges, and a reorganized brain. Although total cranial capacity was not much larger than that of contemporary Neanderthals, the internal structure showed profound changes: a more complex frontal cortex, expanded language-related regions, and denser neural connections. This reorganization allowed a qualitative leap in abstract thought, planning, cooperation, and creativity. The anatomy of Homo sapiens also reflected a distinct evolutionary strategy. A more slender and lightweight body, longer limbs, and a narrow pelvis were adapted for long-distance travel. This locomotor efficiency allowed individuals to traverse vast territories in search of food, shelter, and survival opportunities. Physical endurance, combined with the ability to sweat to regulate temperature, provided a key advantage in hot climates and during extended days of persistent hunting. But no innovation was as decisive as the mastery of fire. While earlier species, such as Homo erectus, had already controlled it, Homo sapiens made it central to culture and survival. Fire allowed processing of hard-to-digest foods, elimination of parasites, and improved nutrient absorption. This energetic transformation contributed to brain growth and strengthened social bonds around nightly fires, where stories, knowledge, and survival strategies were shared. With fire also came new forms of technology. The diversity of Upper Paleolithic stone tools, such as fine points, knives, scrapers, and burines, reflects more advanced thinking, oriented towards specific tasks. The appearance of throwing spears, spear throwers, and body ornaments indicates an increasingly elaborate symbolic world. In various regions of Africa, there is early evidence of bone artifacts and mineral pigments used over 70,000 years ago, showing that symbolic thought preceded the worldwide expansion of the species. Around 70,000 to 60,000 years ago, groups of Homo sapiens began leaving Africa in successive migrations. Following coastal routes through the Middle East, southern Asia, and then Oceania, Homo sapiens expanded into unknown territories, adapting rapidly thanks to their imagination and cultural flexibility. Human populations interacted with Neanderthals and Denisovans, sharing genes with them. Today, millions of people outside Africa retain small proportions of DNA from these species, a testament to ancient encounters. As they moved into Europe around 45,000 years ago, modern humans encountered a cold continent dominated by large mammals. Neanderthals, adapted to glacial climates, had developed robust bodies and efficient hunting techniques. But Homo sapiens introduced a new cultural dimension: composite tools, lighter spear points, needles for sewing fitted clothing, and more elaborate shelters. These innovations did not necessarily imply biological superiority, but a greater capacity to modify the environment and transmit knowledge cumulatively. In parallel, one of the most emblematic achievements of our species emerged: cave art. The paintings of Sulawesi, Indonesia, over 45,000 years old, represent some of the earliest examples. In Europe, the caves of Chauvet, Lascaux, and Altamira depict animals with astonishingly precise detail: bison, horses, mammoths, and woolly rhinoceroses. These works, made with mineral pigments and sophisticated techniques, indicate deep symbolism and possibly the emergence of mythological thinking. Music, body ornamentation, and ritual burials also spread during this period. Perforated shells, pendants, red ochre, and feathers were used to mark group identities and social status. Graves of young individuals adorned with symbolic objects reveal the presence of complex beliefs about death. The human world was acquiring a spiritual dimension unknown to other animals. The use of fire diversified further. In addition to cooking, it was used to manage landscapes, burning grasslands, clearing forests, and attracting young herbivores. In Australia, evidence suggests that early controlled burning practices transformed entire ecosystems, facilitating human expansion into territories where large marsupials had thrived for thousands of years. Fire reshaped planetary ecology even before agriculture. The Ice Age reached its peak between 26,000 and 19,000 years ago. During this period, modern humans developed more complex clothing made from sewn skins, fine needles, and designs adapted to extreme climates. Stone tools became smaller and more efficient. Homes were organized into seasonal camps, and cooperative hunting of large mammals became an essential survival strategy. In some regions, mammoths, reindeer, and horses became pillars of subsistence. At the end of the glaciation, around 12,000 years ago, the landscapes warmed and temperate forests, wetlands, and grasslands expanded. In these new conditions, some groups of Homo sapiens began experimenting with the domestication of plants and animals. What had begun as a lineage of adaptable hunter-gatherers was about to initiate an ecological revolution that would forever transform the destiny of the planet.